Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, November 11th, 2024. All right, first thing I want to mention, our fundraiser is over. We reached our goal. I want to thank everybody who helped us get there. Without our readers, without our supporters, without people who watch this show, we would not be able to get by. We're completely relying on you. So again, I appreciate everyone who pitched in. Now, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Israel kills 51 Palestinians in Gaza in 24 hours. So I wanted to make the top story about the violence in Gaza because with everything going on kind of on the domestic front in the U.S. with the election, it seems like fewer eyes are on Gaza than before, and it is just really horrific on the ground there. So Gaza's health ministry said Sunday that Israeli forces killed at least 51 Palestinians and wounded 164 in the previous 24-hour period as relentless Israeli strikes continued across the Strip. Dozens of Palestinians were killed by an Israeli strike on a house sheltering displaced Palestinians in Jabalia, which has been under a total siege since early October as part of an ethnic cleansing campaign that's being conducted by the Israeli military in northern Gaza. According to Al Jazeera, at least 33 Palestinians, including 13 children, were reported killed in the strike on Jabalia, in this one strike. This picture, very sad. The girl that this man is holding is dead. So another just slaughter of children. I mean, 13 children killed in this one strike. And I saw lots of other pictures of the aftermath and just, pictures and video from Reuters and the other news agencies of children dead and wounded by this strike. So a day earlier, Reuters reported that a strike hit al-Mawasi, which is a coastal area that the Israeli military has designated a so-called safe zone, but it has come under repeated attacks. And according to the residents there, the strike, which hit al-Mawasi on Friday, so this was a couple days ago, killed children as they were preparing to play soccer. Mohammed Zanoun, a relative of the dead children, told Reuters, quote, "The rocket struck them. There were no wanted or targeted people there, and there was nobody else in the street, just the children who were killed yesterday," end quote. The report did not say how many children were actually killed by that strike. Another thing that happened on Friday, the UN's Human Rights Office said that nearly 70% of the Palestinian fatalities it has confirmed were women and children. The youngest victim whose death was verified was 1 day old, and the oldest was a 97-year-old woman. Out of the children under the age of 18, those aged 5 to 9 represented the biggest single age category. So out of everybody under 18, most of them were aged 5 to 9. So far, the UN's Rights Office has verified 8,119 victims, fatalities. Of course, that's far lower than the number released by Gaza's health ministry, but the Human Rights Office says that, it's going to take them a long time. They're cross-checking, confirming with all different sources, and they say by the time they're all caught up, they expect the death toll to be similar to what the health ministry is putting out. And then Gaza's health ministry said on Sunday that the latest violence brought its death toll since October 7th, 2023 to 43,603 and the number of wounded to 102,929. The ministry only counts bodies that are brought to hospitals and morgues and said, quote, "There are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulance and civil defense crews cannot reach them," end quote. I know I have some new listeners. A lot of people say, "Oh, can you trust the health ministry's numbers?" Based on their track record in previous conflicts and just the scale of the violence in Gaza, they're considered reliable for a number of reasons. And again, they're not counting people who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. And if you watch that interview that I did with Dr. Sidwa, by looking at the data, they estimated that the real death toll is much higher. And their estimate takes into account, again, people who are missing and presumed dead, and also indirect deaths caused by the siege. That includes starvation and disease. Lots of newborn babies have died. They estimate that at least 118,000 Palestinians have been killed in a year in Gaza. And this is a U.S.-funded, U.S.-enabled, completely. Israel would not be able to do this without U.S. support, military aid, and political support as well at the UN. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu's ethnic cleansing in Gaza is on display for all to see. So this article is from Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper. It's another editorial from them, calling what's happening in northern Gaza ethnic cleansing. And the point that I made on Twitter about this is that where are these editorials from American media outlets? We don't see that. Again, this is not just Netanyahu's ethnic cleansing campaign. This is Joe Biden's ethnic cleansing campaign as well. So the Israeli military is conducting an ethnic cleansing operation in the northern Gaza Strip. The few Palestinians remaining in the area are being forcibly evacuated. Homes and infrastructure have been destroyed, and wide roads in the area are being built and completing the separation of the communities in the northern strip from the center of Gaza City. A Haaretz military correspondent who was just there said that the area looked like it was hit by a natural disaster. And this is something that I covered last week, was this report from one of their correspondents who actually went into northern Gaza and said, there's nothing there. There's not a single home in this town, in these areas for Palestinians to return to. The Israeli military is firing artillery into these areas to make sure civilians leave and don't come back. A senior IDF officer identified by London's The Guardian newspaper as Brigadier General Itzik Cohen, the commander of the 162nd Division, told reporters, quote, "There is no intention of allowing the residents of the northern Gaza Strip to return to their homes," end quote. The officer said that the vast majority of residents of the area's communities, that's Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, El Atatra, and Jabalia, have already evacuated. He said, quote, "We have received very clear orders. My task is to create a cleansed space. We are moving the population for its protection in order to create freedom of action for our forces," end quote. He was asked if they were carrying out the general's plan. He said, I don't know what the general plan is. We're just acting on our orders. He said that his division delivers humanitarian aid toward the south outside of the cleansed zone in the northern strip, where Israel does not allow any food, water, and medicine. And so this is, again, the Haaretz editorial board saying it's important to call things by their name. Island, who is the Israeli general who drew up the general's plan, may have sold these ideas to the public, but the cleansing of the space in northern Gaza is carried out by the IDF under the direction of its commanders, starting with the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, the head of Southern Command, and they're saying he's subordinate to the directives of the political leadership, which is Netanyahu. And again, as an American, this is a 100% funded and enabled. Well, it's not 100% funded by the U.S., but the point for us is that Israel wouldn't be able to do this without U.S. military aid, without the huge number, the $17 billion that Biden has given Israel over the past year. And it's not just giving them bombs, giving them munitions. It's also the fact that Israel's Air Force is almost all American-made planes. That means they need spare parts and maintenance that only the U.S. can provide. And the U.S. replenishes all their air defenses and everything like that. So, again, not just the Netanyahu ethnic cleansing campaign, also a Biden-Harris ethnic cleansing campaign. All right, so the next story here, Qatar says that it suspended its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas. So Qatar's foreign ministry announced on Saturday that Doha had suspended its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas, citing the lack of progress in Gaza hostage and ceasefire negotiations. So the foreign ministry said, quote, "The state of Qatar notified the parties 10 days ago during the last attempts to reach an agreement that it would stall its efforts to mediate between Hamas and Israel if an agreement was not reached in that round," end quote. So this statement came in response. There was all these reports that Qatar had ended its role as mediator altogether. and also that they agreed with a U.S. request to expel Hamas officials who are based in Doha. The Qatari foreign minister said that the reports were not accurate, basically saying we're only suspending our role. And it seems like they're denying that they're kicking the Hamas officials out. And a senior Hamas official told Al Jazeera that they were aware of Qatar suspending its mediation role, but said that no one told them to leave. So the Hamas office in Doha was opened in 2012 at the request of the U.S., which wanted a line of communication with the Palestinian group. This is something you've seen a lot lately, and this is one of the reasons why Qatar is getting fed up with his role as mediator, because there's all these accusations that they're not putting enough pressure on Hamas, that they have control of Hamas somehow, that they can get them to make concessions. They say that's not the case. And also you see all these Republicans saying, a U.S. partner, because the U.S. has a big military base in Qatar. A U.S. partner should not be hosting Hamas. They should kick them out. Well, the U.S. wanted Hamas to open this office there because they wanted a line of negotiation between Israel and Hamas. And now there's all these reports. I don't think the Biden administration has said it publicly, but there's all these reports that the Biden administration said, you should kick them out now. And I've seen some people celebrate this as some sort of victory for peace, but this just means that there's not going to be any sort of ceasefire, hostage deal, or anything like that is going to happen. I think these next 2.5 months, 2 months till the inauguration, there's just no hope of peace in Gaza. It's just going to be brutal for these next 2.5 months. It's been so brutal already, but there's just no sign of anything slowing down there. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu says that he spoke with Trump 3 times. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that he's spoken with President-elect Donald Trump 3 times since his election victory last week, and that they were on the same page on Iran. Netanyahu said, quote, "These were very good and important conversations. We see eye to eye on the Iranian threat in all its components and the danger it poses. We also see the great opportunity that Israel faces in the field of peace and its expansion and in other areas," end quote. Netanyahu is one of the first foreign leaders to call Trump on his election victory and is likely trying to influence the president-elect to continue providing support for Israel's military operations in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and potentially against Iran. A senior Israeli official told Axios that Netanyahu is sending one of his top aides, Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, to Mar-a-Lago this week. Dermer is also meeting with Biden administration officials in Washington, but Israeli media said that the real purpose of the trip was to hold talks with Trump and his advisors. Trump has vowed that he will strongly support Israel when he returns to office, as he did in his previous administration. He campaigned on being a better president for Israel and being more supportive of Israel than Biden has been. So we'll see. There's these reports that he told Netanyahu to wrap things up by Inauguration Day. And he did speak with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, and he told him that he wants to work to end the war in Gaza. But, he just, again, his campaign rhetoric saying, I was the best president for Israel ever. Joe Biden's been horrible. He's abandoned them, even though Biden's given them more military aid than any president in U.S. history. And then it's going to depend on who ends up in his cabinet. If David Friedman is the ambassador to Israel, again, that's not a good sign. So, I don't think there's really any reason to think that Trump's going to do anything besides give Israel what it wants, like he did before. I think he probably really does want the violence to end by his inauguration, just because he's not going to want to deal with it. But if he comes in and this is still happening, the military aid is going to continue to flow. But we'll see. All right, so the next one here, Iran denies U.S. claims that it was involved in a plot to kill Trump. So Iran's foreign ministry has strongly denied U.S. claims that Iran was involved in an alleged plot to kill President-elect Donald Trump, dismissing the charge as a way to complicate matters between the U.S. and Iran. On Friday, the U.S. Justice Department announced the charges over the alleged plot, claiming the Iranian officials asked an Afghan national who currently resides in Tehran to surveil and ultimately assassinate Trump. So Iran's foreign minister responded on X and said, quote, "Who can in their right mind believe that a supposed assassin sits in Iran and talks online to the FBI?" End quote. And this is Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister. He also said that Iran respects the choice the American people made in the presidential election. He said, quote, "The American people have made their decision, and Iran respects their right to elect the president of their choice. The path forward is also a choice. It begins with respect," end quote. He also reiterated that Iran does not seek nuclear weapons and signaled that Iran is willing to talk with the U.S. about its nuclear program. He said, quote, "Iran is not after nuclear weapons, period. This is a policy based on Islamic teachings and our security calculations. Confidence building is needed from both sides. It is not a one-way street," end quote. So again, he's really kind of putting the signal out that we're willing to talk we're willing to work with the U.S. even with Trump coming in. And that's something that Masoud Peshkin, the president, has said. He wants direct talks with the U.S., which that hasn't happened in a long time. And then also on Saturday, Javad Zarif, who was Iran's foreign minister for many years during the previous Trump administration. Now he's Iran's vice president for strategic affairs. He called on Trump not to continue the maximum pressure policy against Iran, saying, don't follow those wrong policies of the past. And there was a report from the Wall Street Journal that the next administration, Trump administration, is expected to renew the maximum pressure on Iran. And Brian Hook, who oversaw Iran policy in the first Trump administration, is reportedly in charge of the transition for the State Department. So that's not a good sign when it comes to Iran policy. Trump has ruled out, we have a story on this on the page, Trump ruled out Pompeo for anything, which was good to see because Pompeo is just about as bad as you can get. And he was campaigning with him, the day before the election, saying what a great guy he was. So he said no Pompeo, and he also said no Nikki Haley. So at least those two aren't going to be in there. We'll get more into that at the end here. So the next one here, Netanyahu appoints a settler activist as Israel's ambassador to the U.S. This is from Middle East Eye. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appointed Yashel Leiter, a longtime advocate for the expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, as Israel's ambassador to the United States. Leiter, a close associate of Netanyahu, previously served as his chief of staff when Netanyahu was finance minister. He was also an aide to the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon when he was a member of the Knesset. So Leiter, who will replace Michael Herzog as ambassador, was born in the U.S. and moved to Israel 4 decades later. He resides in the Eli settlement north of Ramallah and founded the U.S.-based charity One Israel Fund, which provides security equipment and financial assistance to settlements. So he's a settler. I mean, it says he was born in the U.S. and he moved to Israel 4 decades later. So he moved late in his life. And I've heard him talk. He has an American accent. There's a lot of Americans in the settlements. I'm from Long Island. I hear a lot of settlers talk. They sound like they're from where I'm from. There's a lot of settlers from New York, specifically. Leiter has previously called for the annexation of the West Bank in an article published in 2020. So this guy's just a big-time settler, really pushing for the advancement of settlements. So I think there's a strategic move here. Netanyahu's going to try to really continue the advancement of settlements in the West Bank with the goal of annexation. Again, if David Friedman is around, he just wrote a book about how the U.S. should fund the Israeli annexation of the West Bank. So that'll be a bad sign if he's going to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strike kills 23 in North Lebanon village. This article is from Jason Ditz. So Israel really, the airstrikes in Lebanon have been very heavy the past few days. So this was on Sunday. A strike hit the northern village of Almat, killing at least 23 people, 7 of them identified as children by Lebanon's health ministry. Rescue workers are still in the area looking for more survivors, and the toll has not been finalized. At least 6 survivors were reported wounded. This village is in a region that is strongly Maronite Christian, but the village's own population is majority Shiite Muslim. Israel has yet to comment on the strike, but security officials reported to the AFP that an unnamed Hezbollah member was visiting one of the attacked homes. He apparently died of his wounds along with a lot of other people. Somehow Israel, they've been doing this for so long now, but they justify, if there's one Hezbollah, one Hamas guy, and it kills dozens or even, according to the reporting from 972 magazine, even if it kills hundreds of civilians, they can launch an airstrike and kill everybody, kill them all, as long as you get one guy. And then, of course, in other cases, they've just bombed civilian targets. That's another thing that was reported by 972 magazine, that in Gaza, they purposely targeted civilian buildings, what they call power targets, as part of a pressure campaign on civilians. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're doing the same thing in Lebanon. We've seen a lot of residential buildings destroyed. So there was other attacks across Lebanon on Sunday. They killed at least 38 people. And then a day earlier on Saturday, Lebanon's health ministry reported that 53 people were killed. So just on Saturday and Sunday, almost 100 people killed by Israeli strikes. So just relentless airstrikes in Lebanon. The next one here, the U.S. bombs Yemen, says that it targeted numerous weapon sites. So the U.S. launched airstrikes in Yemen on Saturday night, with Pentagon officials claiming that numerous Houthi weapon sites were targeted. Al Mayadeen reported a total of airstrikes in the capital Sana'a and in the Amran province. The strikes were reported as U.S.-British aggression, but it's unclear if the UK was involved. A Pentagon official told ABC News, quote, "The targets contained various advanced conventional weapons used to target military and civilian vessels navigating international waters throughout the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden," end quote. The U.S. strikes came after the Houthis claimed a missile attack on the Nevatim air base in southern Israel. And the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, they also said that they shot down another U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone for the 12th time since November 2023. The Pentagon hasn't confirmed all of them, but they've said recently, when one was shot down, that that they've lost a lot of these MQ-9 drones. They just didn't want to say what the number was, but the Houthis have said they've shot down 12. And a lot of times they put out videos and pictures of the drones that they down, and that's a lot of money. Just 12 U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drones. So the U.S. began bombing Yemen in defense of Israeli shipping back in January, and the U.K. joined several rounds of airstrikes. But the campaign has done nothing to deter the Houthis, who continue to target shipping and launch attacks on Israel. The Houthis began the attacks in response to the U.S.-backed Israeli genocidal war in Gaza, and have said they would stop if there were a ceasefire in Gaza. Just a little background for those who don't know, from 2015 to 2022, the U.S. supported a Saudi-UAE war against the Houthis in Yemen, which involved very heavy airstrikes and a blockade, and there's also a ground campaign. And during that time, the Houthis only became a more formidable fighting force. So the idea that just limited airstrikes is going to do anything to them. Anybody who knew anything about the Houthis back in January when this started knew that this was just going to escalate the situation, and that's exactly what happened. And that war in Yemen, that Saudi-UAE war, which was backed by the U.S., killed at least 377,000 people, according to the UN, and more than half died of starvation and disease caused by the siege. Brutal war, lots of young children killed. Really, really horrific stuff. And there's been a ceasefire between the Houthis and the Saudis since April 2022, but new U.S. sanctions that they imposed on the Houthis are actually blocking the implementation of a lasting peace deal between them. All right, so the next one here, 9 civilians reported killed in Israeli attacks on Damascus. So Israel's bombing Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. So this is another one from Jason Ditz. So they attacked Zayeda Zanaib, the Shiite suburb capital. Sorry, I'm jumbling my words here. It's a Shiite suburb south of the capital of Damascus. And it hit a pair of apartment buildings in the residential area. Hospital sources reported that 9 civilians were killed and 20 others were wounded in the strikes. Details are still emerging on the strikes, and Israel has not commented on them. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights claimed that the apartment buildings were occupied by Hezbollah members and the attacks targeted specific members, but that cannot be confirmed. So they've been hitting this area and Syria very hard lately. There's been a lot of casualties. All right, so the next one here, the Pentagon to send contractors to Ukraine. So Pentagon officials said Friday that the U.S. will send American contractors to Ukraine to help repair U.S.-made weapons, marking another escalation of U.S. involvement in the proxy war. A Pentagon official told CNN on Friday, quote, in order to help Ukraine repair and maintain military equipment provided by the U.S. and its allies, DoD is soliciting bids for a small number of contractors who will help Ukraine maintain the assistance we've already provided, end quote. The report said the decision to send contractors was made before the U.S. presidential election. The contractors are expected to focus on the maintenance of U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets, Patriot air defense systems, and other advanced equipment. The official speaking to CNN said that the contractors will be located far from the front lines and that they will not be fighting Russian forces. The official also downplayed the idea that sending the Pentagon contractors will significantly change things on the ground, saying that there is already, quote, a wide array of American companies who have personnel in Ukraine fulfilling contracts for the Ukrainian government, so this will not lead to a substantial increase of employees of U.S. companies working on the ground in Ukraine, end quote. The difference here is that it'll be the Pentagon actually sending them. And then as far as we know about the U.S. presence on the ground in Ukraine, we know there's a few dozen Pentagon personnel based at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. There's also a small number of special operations forces. We don't know exactly how many. The Discord leaks back in March 2023, actually, I forget exactly when they came out, but part of the Discord leaks, there was a document dated from March 2023 that said there was 14 U.S. special operations soldiers in Ukraine. So that number could be different now. And of course, there's also an unknown number of CIA operatives on the ground, as the spy agency has been very deeply enmeshed with Ukraine's intelligence since 2014. And we know that there's CIA there. It could be pretty, very extensive. And I've seen people in response to this report say, oh, there's already all these foreign mercenaries there, these American mercenaries. This isn't really a big deal. But I don't know if there's been any connection made to the U.S. funding any of these mercenaries that are there. This is the Pentagon sending contractors. It's another step. It's another increase in U.S. involvement in this war. And it's one that Biden's doing while he's out the door. All right, so the next one here, Trump spoke with Putin, according to the Washington Post. I don't think this has been officially confirmed by Trump or Putin yet, but this was on Sunday. The Washington Post reported that President-elect Donald Trump spoke with Putin following his election victory last week. A source told the Post that Trump advised Putin not to escalate in Ukraine and reminded the Russian leader of the sizable U.S. military presence in Europe. Sources also said they discussed bringing peace to Europe, and Trump expressed interest in a follow-up call to discuss the resolution of Ukraine's war soon. This call took place on Thursday, one day after the president-elect spoke with Zelensky. And according to Axios, Elon Musk actually joined Trump in the call with Zelensky, and the Ukrainian leader was somewhat reassured by what he heard, again, according to this report. And I think Musk said something, according to these reports, like, oh, the Starlink, we're going to keep providing the Starlink or whatever. So we'll see. This is something Trump campaigned on ending, and I think him picking Vance as vice president was a good sign that this is something he wants to end. And the Biden administration thinks he's going to bring it to an end. They're trying to rush all these weapons over there before January 20th. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that President Biden will try to convince Trump to continue the proxy war. Sullivan said, quote, President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe, end quote. And Biden and Trump are expected to talk this Wednesday, and they're expected to talk about Ukraine. All right, so the last story we have here is about Trump ruling out Haley and Pompeo in his administration. This is just a short story about it from Axios. So, there's all these reports about names being floated for certain positions. I know Mike Rogers is now a big one for defense secretary, and he's no good. I mean, this is one of the things, like, everybody knows Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley. Everybody knows they're neocon war hawks. They're no good. But there's a lot of other people that could end up in positions that don't have the name recognition but are just as bad. And Mike Rogers, I think, is one of them. One thing I know about him is that for the past 2 years, 2.5 years, he's been hounding one of these Republicans, hounding the Biden administration. Send more weapons to Ukraine. Give them this, give them that. And, if you look at, there's been kind of this core group of Republicans, sending letters to Biden and Blinken, telling them to take that next step. And I know he's been one of them. But there's also, some signs that, the fact that Trump, what was, I thought, significant about this was that Trump wrote a post on Truth Social that he will not be inviting Nikki Haley or Mike Pompeo to his administration. I think that means he's listening to because there's like kind of a say no to Mike Pompeo thing going around on Twitter. I think that's a sign he might be listening. And then Dave Smith, who's a friend of ours, he tweeted something like, no Pompeo is good, but we should demand that, no neocons or war hawks are going to be in this administration. And then Donald Trump Jr. retweeted him and said, I agree 100% or something. So there's some people in the transition, there's all sorts of different people right now trying to get at Trump's ear in the transition period. But there are some who I think don't want Warhawks. Unfortunately, there's not many alternatives. There are some. Kyle Anzalone put out a good list of potential picks for certain cabinet positions. So again, we'll start to get an idea of things when they start filling these things out. I think Secretary of State might be announced soon. I think Rick Grinnell is in the running for that. I also heard Marco Rubio is, which is really bad. So again, we'll see. We'll get a better idea as things start to fill out. And I'm going to be covering that, but I still think it's important. I mean, look at all this violence going on that the U.S. is involved in, especially in Gaza. We really need to. I need to just make a point to continue to cover that every day. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. One from Jerry Condon. November 11th was originally Armistice Day, a peace holiday. One from Ted Snyder, Multipolarity and its Potentials for Peace. One from Sam Bull, Deadline, U.S. says Israel is failing in aid efforts. What happens now? One from Aaron Sobczak, it's always been Hamiltonian statecraft. And one from ESPN about Pat Tillman, the football player who was killed by friendly fire in Iraq. It's a really interesting investigation into that. It's kind of like interactive and kind of fun to scroll through. But, that case is very sketchy and it gets into a lot of interesting stuff. So definitely go check that out. So that is everything. Go check out our blog. Kyle Anzalone Show, Conflicts of Interest is in there. If you want to support this show, like, subscribe, comment, share, all that stuff helps out. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on X. Follow me at DeCampDave. Follow antiwar.com. Follow antiwar.com on Instagram. The posts are really great over there. But that is it for me for today. I will be back with some more news tomorrow. Thanks for listening.